The Fed has been buying bonds directly from corporations to support them. Now they're starting to meddle in the secondary markets. What does that mean, and how important is it? By the way, hint, it's hugely important. Check this out. Professor Richard Wolff is with us. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info. And Democracy at Work, the organization. R.D. Wolff also is another of his websites with two F's on the end. He's the author of numerous books. His most recent, Understanding Socialism. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, as in Professor Wolff with two F's. Professor Wolff, welcome back. We've talked in the past about how the Fed was buying corporate bonds, but there was a piece in CNBC this week on the 15th, 3 days ago, suggesting that it's gone beyond just bailing out or just propping up, United Airlines or IBM or something, that they're actually now buying corporate bonds in the secondary market. And, there are rumors that they're buying stock in that marketplace as well, in exchange traded funds, ETFs. What is the secondary market? What is the significance of this? Or am I overly freaked out about nothing?
No, you're catching an important point that got very little attention, much less than it deserved. Okay, first the definitions. The Federal Reserve already, starting in the crash of 2008, got into the business of lending money directly to troubled corporations and taking in return IOUs that are called corporate bonds. So the Federal Reserve helped out a company by essentially lending it money and accepting its bonds. What this new development is different. It says that the Federal Reserve not only can do what I just said, but can do something different. It can go into the existing credit markets where companies have already issued bonds 1 year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it doesn't really matter, that were purchased by investors, banks, insurance companies, and others. And the people who lent that money to the corporations and got the bonds 1, 2, 5 years ago, can now turn around and sell those bonds to the Federal Reserve. In other words, all of the enormous outstanding debt of corporations exists in this thing called the secondary market, and the Federal Reserve has basically said, in addition to lending money directly to corporations for a particular loan, they will now backstop. They will become a buyer in the regular market that used to be a private market of private corporations lending money to one another. This will now become a market that the governmental apparatus of the Federal Reserve will step in to support. What it does, among other things, is to make the final humorous joke about those right-wingers, libertarians, conservative economists who like to talk about, quote-unquote, the free market. That was always a utopian delusion, but now with the Federal Reserve literally becoming another player in the private market, the only difference being it has the power to print the money it uses to buy things which nobody else can do, any claim that our economic system is somehow free or independent of government controls and manipulation is flat out just an untruth.
Now, one of the axioms of how markets work, it's usually applied to the stock market. I'm assuming, well, actually, this is my question: does this apply to the bond market as well? Is that the prices in a marketplace go up when the number of buyers exceed the number of sellers, and prices in a marketplace go down when the number of sellers exceeds the number of buyers. In other words, when more people want to sell, prices drop. When more people want to buy, prices go up. And so if the Fed jumps into this secondary bond market, which, because these are corporate bonds, is, I believe, one of the stilts that props up the stock market, because these same corporations are listed on the stock market. So if you're helping the corporation, you're going to help their stock price too. I would assume, I'm reality checking this with you. It seems to me that the Fed buying these bonds is going to be supportive of the corporate bond market, which is where your billionaires are invested. And of course, it helps the big corporations. And B, it's also going to have a knock-on effect in the stock market. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. In fact, it is as bald as you want. No one can control whether the company, for example, I'll just pick one, General Motors, it issues a bond, it sells it to a bank, very typical. The bank now resells it to the Federal Reserve. The money that the General Motors borrowed, the General Motors can now use, for example, to buy its own shares in the stock market, which the executives are always incentivized to do because many of them have a contract that governs their salary and bonuses depending on how well their stock goes. So look at them now. They'll be in a position to borrow money, knowing that every bank and insurance companies will be happy to lend to them because those banks and insurance companies can turn around and resell the bond to the Federal Reserve now that it's in there, and the gleeful General Motors borrow up the wazoo in order then to buy shares of stock. So absolutely, credit markets, we say in economics, are interconnected. If the government comes in and supports and boosts one of them, it will spill over to the others. It's only a question of a little bit of time that it takes to work out the mechanisms, but the spillover always happens.
So, economists, and I mean, typically this has been a Republican talking point. Government shouldn't be involved in marketplaces, right?
Right.
Obviously, Republicans no longer believe in anything. In fact, we'll be talking to Steve Bannon about that in the next hour. But is this something that is amenable? I mean, A, is this sustainable? And B, if it's not sustainable, how do we respond to this? I mean, is legislation necessary? Do we need to reverse Reagan's 1980s policy of allowing corporations to buy back their stock, to jack their stock prices? It seems like it's not just limited to that. Do we need to put further restraints on the Fed? How do we deal with this? Or what kind of threat does this represent? Or both?
I'm afraid at this point you really can't. It's too late. You've made the whole economic structure of the United States dependent on government support. We saw that in 2018 when the Fed decided it was time, having pumped so much money into the economy, to let interest rates rise. They did that, and in a matter of weeks, a couple of months, the stock market took such a dive that the Federal Reserve reversed itself and resumed what it calls quantitative easing, pumping more money into the economy, driving down interest rates. It's like asking, when will we get back to the normal level of interest rates, say in the 4 to 6% range? And right now, I think the only answer people like me can give, and most others, is we have no idea not only when that might happen, but we don't even know if it might happen, because you now have, and the metaphor I'm using is not excessive, you now have an addiction. The private enterprise fairy tale is now completely gone. Everything depends on the government coming in, more so in the last 10 weeks than I have ever seen in my life since the Great Depression. Massive government support across the board, and this is really only one small addition. Currently, it's being led by the same Republicans who used to tell you that the least government is the best. They are now the advocates of the exact opposite.